All right. Hello, everyone. I am Josephine Gajasin, Youth Advisory Council member. Welcome to the NFF Youth Book Club. We are so happy and grateful for all of you to be here today. Before we start our event, we would like to acknowledge that Western University is located on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabeg, Haudenosaunee, Lenapehoik, and Chinongton nations, of lands connected with the London Township of Sombra Treaties of 1796 and the Dish of One Spoon Covenant Wampum peoples. With this, we respect the long-standing relationship that Indigenous nations have to this land, as they are our original caretakers. We would like to welcome Elder Myrna to help us open today's event with her words of wisdom and guidance.
Wanabashon in the way Maganaduk, Ishkote Makasin Quadis the cars mondo them. Kajanon and Dunjaba. Uda Wadamayo Dawa and the Shnabi Quanda. This week, Medewan. Oh, this is the most beautiful day. And I'm so happy to be here. I'm so grateful for all of creation giving us this most beautiful day. I'd like to open this session with a prayer. And if you take a moment and connect inside yourself with that power greater than you are, the one I would call Geshem Nadu. Excuse me. Excuse me very much. I'm sorry. To connect with that connection that you have, because we all have that connection with the spirit that watches over us. Whether we call the spirit in various names, we are all connected as one. So with that thought in mind, I suggest that you just close your eyes, get very comfortable in your vessel, and that's where we reside in this human vessel, and just have some quiet time as I offer these prayers. Abba Shomas, Ishkote Makasin Quandis Nikas Mondo them, Bekadranon Dunjaba, Buddha Wadami Odawa Nishnabi Quanda, this week, Medewan. Jimmy Gretch Kajemnado for this most beautiful day, this most wonderful life. Jimmy Gretch for bringing us all here together as one heart, one body, one mind, one soul, and one voice. I say Jimmy Gretch to you. Jimmy Gretch for all those things you have given us since the beginning of time, from the sky world to the earth plane to the underground, for all those Nokamasag and Mishomsag that walked on this creation before us. I say Jimmy Gretch to them. Jimmy Gretch for the sun that travels across the sky during the day, the moon that travels across the sky during the night, all those things we see and all those things we cannot see. Jimmy Gretch for all of those things, the four directions, the east, the south, the west, and the north, the four colors of man, yellow, red, black, and white. Jimmy Gretch for all of the songs and the ceremonies and the spiritual leaders across the world. I say Jimmy Gretch to them. Jimmy Gretch for all that we have been given, from the water we drink, the air we breathe, and the food we eat. And for our Earth Mother, Tessa McWatt, who provides all of that for us. Say Jimmy Gretch to you. Jimmy Gretch for the water we drink, the air we breathe, and the food we eat. For the fire, the thunders, and all of those things that we rely on to bring us good life. I say Jimmy Gretch to you. Jimmy Gretch for watching over us and taking care of us as only you can. Open up our hearts and our minds and our spirit to do this work today. Help us to have that voice, that one voice that's full of love, honesty, respect, and gratitude for all things that we see and all the things we cannot see. Jimmy Gretch to you, Geshem Nado, for guiding us to all be here together at this time, this place. I say Jimmy Gretch to you. Take care of us and watch over us and keep us safe. I say Jimmy Gretch, Nakanagana, all my relations, aho, Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mirna, for that beautiful opening to help us start today's event. We are very excited to host this amazing opportunity for all of you to be here and to have Tessa McWatt here today. This is the 6th annual book club and the 2nd year for it to be organized online. The book club is hosted by Center for Research and Education on Violence Against Women and Children's Education campaign, Neighbours, Friends, and Families, one of the many center's projects. In the past year, NFF launched its youth program, A Space for Youth Voices. Our Youth Advisory Council is composed of young people who have provided support and counsel to the broader youth and education under the project of NFF program. Today's event is being hosted by our YAC members. I would like to introduce my co-YAC members, Dasnor and Spencer, who are co-moderators for this event. If you would like to know more about YAC, the links are in the chat box. Also, follow and interact with us on our socials and get a chance to win a $5 gift card to the place of your choice. For NFF Youth Book Club 2022, the featured book is Shame on Me, An Anatomy of Race and Belonging by Tessa McWatt. Shame on Me is a personal and powerful exploration of history and identity. For this event, we will have the author of Shame on Me present a talk about the book and various themes involved in it. And then we will have a conversation with Tessa McWatt, moderated by my co-YAC member, Dasnor. And lastly, we will have our closing notes presented by our elder Mirna and Spencer, another co-YAC member. If anyone experiences some discomfort and needs someone to talk to reach out to the numbers on the screen, and there are some resources in the chat box. For this event, we are happy to announce that we have partnered with the London Public Library. Now we would like to introduce Ashley from the London Public Library, who will be giving a demo about how to access books through the vast collection of digital and physical copies of the book available at London Public Library. Ashley is a graduate of Western University, where she received her undergraduate degree in English, Language, and Literature, as well as Masters in Library and Information Science. She has been with London Public Library since 2017 in a variety of positions. Currently, she is the Community Outreach Librarian, specializing in children and youth services. Now, I will hand it off to Ashley.
Thank you so much, Josephine, for that introduction and for letting me know that I was muted. I have opened up my screen share, so I'm going to pull up my slides here. I would just like to say thank you, everyone, for the introduction. I'd like to start by echoing Western's land acknowledgement of the lands we share. We're grateful for the opportunity to meet here, and we thank all the generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. And a special thanks to Elder Mirna for opening this event today. I'm going to quickly go over some digital collections and resources that London Public Library offers. London Public Library offers a robust collection of books, magazines, articles, newspapers, music CDs, board games, and musical instruments. In addition, though, we head to our physical collection. We also have a variety of digital resources that include ebooks, audiobooks, language learning tools, and so much more. Our main resource is Libby by Overdrive, and this is a digital media platform for ebooks, audiobooks, and magazines. You can choose through thousands of materials in all of those categories, as well as the materials from other libraries. London Public Library is happy to have partnered with Burlington, Hamilton, and Mississauga, as well as Ottawa Public Libraries. So you're able to check out any digital collections from these libraries as well with your LPL library card. Our collection is constantly updated by our collections librarians with new and relevant material, as well as our LPL Express, which are 7-day loans, but it means there are no waits and no holds for these items, so they're instantly borrowable. Another resource we have is Kantuk Station. This is similar to Libby, however, it is our French only. So this is for all of our French language ebooks and audiobooks. The catalog includes a variety of genres and informs users of new releases and popular titles. Individuals can check out books from the French collection for 7 at a time and for up to 21 days. Another great digital resource that we offer is Hoopla. Hoopla is a digital media service that allows individuals to borrow ebooks, comics, audiobooks, movies, and TV shows. You can borrow up to 6 items a month with Hoopla for free. And the best thing about Hoopla is that, similar to the LPL Express, there are no waits and no holds. So everything that you see on the Hoopla website can be instantly borrowed with no wait. To use these digital resources, you can access them through your LPL library card. You can get a physical card by going into any one of your local branches, or you can access it through an e-account. The only difference is an e-account does not give you access to the physical materials, but it does provide you access to all of our digital resources. You can sign up for an e-account right on our website. LPL is also fine free, so any digital materials or physical materials do not have late fees anymore. If you go to lpl.ca and scroll down our homepage, you'll see Use the Library from Home. This link will allow you to sign up for an e-account. It's a quick and easy form, and as soon as you send it in, you'll be registered to use all of our digital resources from your home. Most of these digital resources can also be downloaded onto a smartphone, tablet, or if it's movies from Hoopla, you can also download them right to your smart TV. We are happy to say that we carry multiple copies of Shame on Me by Tessa McWatt in print, ebook, and audiobook format through our Libby app, as well as in our physical collection. Visit us today at lpl.ca. Thank you so much for having me at this event.
Thank you so much, Ashley. There will be support links in the chat box for your use after this event. Now, to welcome the author of Shame on Me, An Anatomy of Race and Belonging. She's the author of 7 novels and 2 books for young people. Her fiction and nonfiction have been nominated for the Governors General's Award, the City of Toronto Book Awards, and the OCM Bocas Prize. The author that brought so much light to the question, what are you? Tessa McWatt.
Hi, thank you, Josephine, and thank you everybody for being here. It's a real pleasure. It's a really wonderful opportunity to talk to you about my book. And what I wanted to do was first read a bit from it and then sort of talk to you about the process of writing it, the reasons behind why I wrote it, and then some of the research and what the book is really trying to do out there in the world and with you as readers. But I'll start by just reading for a few minutes. I won't explain much until I get to talking about it. So, hypothesis. A young Chinese woman, so young, nearly still a girl, runs through a field of sugarcane. Her cotton shift is torn, her hair wild, there is fear on her face. My grandmother. She is escaping something terrible. Her legs are scraped by sharp stalks. Blood is dripping from her knee. I imagine her eyes are streaming with tears. She is running because in her countryside village in Demerara, British Guiana, she has just been raped by her uncle. I imagine my Indian ancestor as a strong woman, perhaps originally from Oud, modern Uttar Pradesh, who could squat easily, hunched over green, sword-like leaves sprouting from emerging stalks. She is exhausted, pulling weeds out of unfamiliar soil in British Guiana. Thin, fragile from the 112-day journey by ship, she is lucky to have survived on a daily ration of beef or pork, suet, a biscuit, a few raisins. My Arawak ancestor is in a dugout corral on the Bora Bora River that runs through the Iwakrama forest. She paddles past a giant otter sunning itself on a tree stump. My Portuguese ancestor, perhaps from Madeira, arrives among the first free immigrants to the colony in 1835. In her small Hessian sack, she has hidden 20 delicate squares of lace that she stitched while watching her father hauling his fishing nets from the sea. There is a rumor about my French ancestor, but she will never confirm for anyone in the colony that her father had a chalice and a silver ring with hexagon pattern, the Star of David, hidden in his suitcase when he arrived from France. My African great-great-grandmother is lost among trees that don't know her name, don't speak her language, trees that have erased her. She can't find the path that will take her to the clearing. She is getting weak. I reach out to take her by the hand. My Scottish great-great-great-grandmother takes her last breath in East Lothian, and the book she has been reading falls across her chest. She never knows about the brown women with their hands in the soil. Experiment. 8 years old, I'm sitting near the back of the room in the grade 3 classroom of my suburban Toronto elementary school. My desk is close to the window and I'm easily distracted by the birds, one particular bird that preens itself on a branch, its feathers shuddering up and down. I'm not paying much attention to what the teacher is saying. We've been reading a book out loud together and I haven't been asked to read. I feel off the hook, set free to dream. A few minutes into daydreaming, I feel a change of tone in the teacher's voice and the class goes quiet. I snap out of my reverie. There's a question in the air. I look around at my classmates who are looking at each other in search of an answer. Anyone know what that word means? The teacher says. Oh, I think I'd better pay attention because there's a new word and I'll need to know it. Does anyone know what Negro means? Good question, I think. What does that mean? I continue to look around at my classmates to see if anyone is going to come up with the answer or even a guess. The teacher seems anxious. This word has weight. Kenneth Percy puts up his hand. The teacher invites him to speak. Yeah, Tessa, he says, as he points towards me at the back of the room. Everyone in the class turns to face me. I freeze, my mind goes blank, and all that is going on in my body is a low fizz, like a misfiring electric circuit. As I now realize, my teacher tries to rescue me from something she herself sees as a slur, a word that is fine in a book, but not in a person. Oh no, not Tessa, she says, to comfort me and all who might worry about what is in their midst. The other kids continue to stare at me. Doing her job as the class's moral compass, she thinks fast. No, Tessa's something else. The misfiring electric circuit spews shocks through my cheeks, my arms, and my legs, which begin to shake. What are you, Tessa? What am I? I have no idea what she's asking. I feel as if I've failed a major test. I should have been paying attention. I should know how to answer this. You know, people are certain things, she says, still trying to help, but wounding me deeper and deeper with every second she allows the class's eyes to remain on me. Things like, say, Mexican, she waits, but I have nothing. Brazilian, Filipino, she carries on, offering possibilities she sees in my face, but in that moment I hear only words that describe all the things that everyone else in the room isn't. She waits, the circuit hums, and it becomes so unbearable that I fold my arms on the desk and put my head into them. I go away deep inside myself. I don't remember where I go or for how long, but when I look up again, everyone in the class has gone to recess and the teacher is wiping the board. She doesn't try to speak to me as I get up from my desk and leave the room, heavier now, saddled with something corrosive. There, with my head in my arms, I learned that I could disappear. I could become invisible. I wondered why the teacher had not asked anyone else in the class the question, why my best friend didn't have to answer it. I kept these questions and my invisibility to myself. I understood, without being able to articulate it, that language had the power to change me completely with the utterance of one word. I had known what Black was. Our extended family and friends were an array of shades, and I had known where I was from, but that's not what I had been asked. Negro was a word like species, a scientific word that clever people knew, but I didn't. I began to pay attention to the power of words, and being asked what I was and realizing I didn't know, I set off to find out. I believe it was the moment I became a writer. So I wanted to read that bit just to set you up with that question of what are you, which is what the book is really the catalyst of me writing the book, because I think I've probably been writing this book since that moment. And so the book it started to take shape in my mind in 2016. I had been writing fiction for all the years in between, and I've published several novels. But in 2016, we had, first of all, my father died. We had Brexit here in the UK, and we had Donald Trump in power in America. And so things felt very, very polarized. And it felt like there were things between on the topic of race that were not nuanced. And I wanted to express my experiences in order to address these things. So I'm going to just talk through some slides. If Ava, you could put those up. Great. I hope everybody can see those. Great. So I just wanted to, from that bit I read from, I wanted to stress that I was age 8, and that was the question that was asked for me. So that set out to be how I was going to deal with the things in this book. And as I said, I'd been dealing with it in fiction for a long time, but nonfiction became important because of the times and the events. And I thought I can no longer sort of deal with race obliquely. I really needed to address this head on. So I wanted to look at my past, at my life. The bit that I read at the beginning were imagined scenarios of my ancestors. So my ancestry is African, Chinese, Indian, Portuguese, French, English, Scottish, and indigenous South Americans, Arawak. So I had such an array of kind of biological background that I wanted to unpack that and understand this question of what are you? So that's how I started to decide to write it. So it wasn't a very easy thing to do, but I was looking at my ancestry, and some of those ancestors I had to imagine, because there wasn't very much information about them. Coming from places where there was forced migration or enslavement or indenture, it was important to research that, but there was no way of tracking it. So a lot of this book is about imagining my ancestors. So where did I start? How did I want to write it? Well, I started out with family trees and family stories, but as I said, it's very difficult to trace family trees if you're someone from a background with rupture and a migration that is violent. Even if it's not violent, it's a very difficult thing in terms of family trees. And so because I was a product of basically a country that was founded on slavery, one of the things that I absolutely needed to do was research slavery, but also to research what happened after slavery, which was in the indentured laborers that came to British Guyana from China and India. So indentureship, for those of you who don't know, is an economic system that controls every aspect of life, even social, and it's not quite slavery, but it's very close to slavery. And in the Caribbean, after slavery was abolished in 1833, sorry, the plantation owners needed workers on their plantations to continue the sugar trade. And so they offered land, and after a certain amount of working on the land, they offered land, and the first people that came were the Chinese, and then there came some Portuguese, Syrians, Lebanese, Indians, and so my whole background is made up of all those people who were first enslaved, and also the colonizers, the people who owned the plantations, as well as those indentured laborers. So that was the kind of research I did. And I also looked at the history of race science. So race science was something that was in the 17th century. It really took hold as a way of separating and categorizing people, so that people were looked at through their physical characteristics in a way that classified them as less or more human. And obviously this was a system based on European thinking and European Enlightenment thinking that was very much about classical beauty. And that in that classical beauty, those models of classical beauty were obviously European and not anywhere from the rest of the world. So I wanted to think about race science and to think about how that race science creates race by mixing the idea of dehumanizing people in order to facilitate slavery, and then making others based on an economic model that I see as the plantation. So I look at Guyana as having a kind of plantation structure where you have the enslaved people at the bottom, then the indentured laborers, and then the white plantation owners. So it's a kind of hierarchy of race. And I think that that economic system is something that perpetuated the whole culture for the Caribbean, but it also, in my book, I talk about how it still perpetuates our way of thinking around white supremacy and who has value and who doesn't. And so in order to look at all those things, I looked at the body as a kind of experiment. Because I was looking at race science, I thought, well, I will look at sort of a scientific experiment. So I made the book into a kind of scientific experiment. What I read to you was from the hypothesis, that beginning section. And then I go into experiment, and then I go into analysis and findings eventually. So I wanted to set it up. And so I thought, what am I going to experiment on? Well, I'm going to experiment on the body, because I'm going to look at my body and all the bits of my body that are that are racialized. So I was looking, I'll show you in a minute what parts we're talking about, but I'm looking at racialized bodies in order to undermine some of those myths and stereotypes about race, because I wanted to make a point that race isn't real. Race is a construct, and I'll get to that in a minute, but actually racism precedes race. In other words, people need ways of othering, and therefore sometimes the body is that site of the othering. And one of the things that I do a lot in the book is that I talk about race being a story. And so storytelling is really, really key to what I'm investigating. I'm a storyteller, as I said, because of that moment in What Are You? I've been looking at that idea about what are we for a long time, for my whole writing life. And so my feeling is that stories are very powerful, and we're telling them all the time. Okay, I'm going to just move on. So in researching and structuring the book, I was looking at body parts, because these are the racialized parts of bodies that we often relate to. So I was looking at the nose, the fact that we often refer to, racial characteristics around noses, and in a hierarchy in which European noses are meant to be the place where power resides, then in a culture where those noses don't conform, then there's an obvious othering, and it's a kind of lowering on the hierarchy. I also look at eyes, and the epicanthic is what's it called, the epicanthic fold that is often seen in Asian eyes, but on the other hand, it's also seen in many other places of eyes. So it's become a kind of othered, racialized characteristic that people make huge assumptions around. And so I was breaking down the parts of my own body. I talk about hair because there's good hair, there's stereotypes of what good hair is. And it comes from a kind of classification in race science. In 1850, there was a scientist who had a book about hair, and looked at classification of mankind by hair and wool. And so he talked about hair being possessed by, people from European heritage, and wool being possessed by people from African heritage. And you can see how that's a dehumanizing aspect. It's a way of dehumanizing someone in order to other them, in order to lessen their value in the world, and also therefore have justify enslaving them. I talk about us because there's all kinds of stereotypes around that, and in Europe they used to have exhibitions of like a kind of human exhibition in freakery, and there's a very famous Koke woman called Saartjie Baartman who was exhibited because of the amount of fat on her buttocks as a kind of freakery. And so there's again all kinds of tropes of bodies. I talk about bones. There's a myth that Black people can't swim, and because of some of the density of their bones, which is an absolute race science myth and not true. But the truth is, I look at the truth, and the truth is that thousands and thousands and thousands of African enslaved people were thrown overboard in slave ships when they needed to lessen the weight, and when they needed to balance out the hull. And so we're talking about a fear of water. We're talking about generations of trauma around water, and there's an example of in the southern states of swimming pools being barred from by Black people, so they weren't allowed to go in during the Jim Crow era. Obviously, skin and blood, this idea that we're blood brothers, and blood is something that defines people. So I kind of go through a breakdown of the body and the myths, and I put them through this experiment to fight back against race science. And I do so through the storytelling of some of the literature that affected me most, so that had me understand what racialization and what creating race was, how that was functioning in the world. So the things that I learned through writing this book, this quote is one of my favorite from James Baldwin. "You think your pain and your heartbreak are unprecedented, but then you read." And I think that's really key to what the book is about, because the book is about stories, making stories, and ways of understanding being and ways of understanding community. So I looked at some of the things that I learned that throughout history, people have enslaved others using ideas of other or savage or barbarians in order to gain advantage. And this is primarily economic advantage. It's usually economic advantage. So that led me to look at how power and how power uses categories in order to continue to perpetuate economic advantage over others. So it's very much a kind of analysis of how power works. So the other kinds of things I've just kind of touched on already. Race is being made all the time. So I think, we saw race being accentuated during the pandemic when there was a lot of violence against Asians. There still is a lot of violence, random violence against Asians as a kind of blaming way about the coronavirus. And so it's kind of constantly rears its head based on who decides who's in power and who wants to other someone else or blame someone else. And that race is a story. There's a saying by two authors who have written a book called Racecraft, Barbara and Karen Fields, and they say that race is like 6 o'clock. And to understand that, you have to think about 6 o'clock or 2 o'clock or midnight or noon are constructs, right? They don't actually exist, but they exist because we all agree that these things exist. They're all kind of mutual agreements. So it's because we agree it's real. And so race is a construct that we have come to agree on, or we continue to perpetuate and tell stories about, and that we build cultural and historical power dynamics through. So it's not real, but it's also it's real to the people who experience it. So racism is real, even if race isn't. So race might be a construct and a story, but it's a story that has consequences, deep, violent, and very disturbing consequences. So if it's a story, then we can tell new ones. And I think that's the real key to the book and what I'm trying to accomplish in it, that storytelling can be changed and we can look at things differently. And that if we look at race as a construct, we can think of whiteness as a state of mind. Whiteness is a kind of old European construct that maintains power over others, and it's something that facilitates and supports the othering of people and keeps systems of inequality in place. So that's my way of understanding what whiteness is, that people choose it, that it's a choice, that you can have that thinking. And so the image of the plantation in which the white owner is at the top is central to my way of understanding the hierarchies that exist still in many places in the world. So for me, the plantation hierarchy is still in operation. So I've said some of what's on this slide, actually. So race is a construct. There's no biological basis for it. And there's a very good video from the BBC that I was part of, that I hope that Anushka might share with you later on, that really gets into this with a lot of people coming in on and giving their experience on how that is their take on it. But as I said, racism is very real. And I think that racism is the core of sort of our racialized international capitalism. In other words, there are constantly systems of whiteness in place in order to have economic advantage, and people's worth, their labor, their way of living in the world is valued through this hierarchy. So, and slavery was about the exploitation of people, the extraction of resources, which is very much what the plantation was. And it's also, I think, functioning today. We function in a way in which our resources, our land, the planet is just a plantation for capitalists to just completely to completely extract for the sake of profit. And I see that as functioning in the same way as it did before my ancestors arrived in British Guyana. And I think our Earth, our planet, is in trouble as a result of that. So the book is a very personal account. It's based on my body. It's based on my family. There are photographs in it of my family. But it's also a very, for me, a political challenge, and the political and the personal needed to be absolutely entwined for me. It's a history of racialization that is embedded in the history of European Enlightenment thinking. And I think it's this thinking that needs to be questioned and challenged. So my feeling is that the categories that we talk about ourselves in, black, brown, yellow, red, they're not useful categories because they're static. And I think what's more important are, they're not radical, but I think creativity and the imagination can be radical, and that we need to get together to understand new ways of imagining how we can live together and live together on the earth, to live together in a way that's harmonious and equal and fair, but also how we do that with the planet that we're living on. And so the book, that first question that I was asked, what are you? I think the book moves through that breaking down that question, but what it ends up doing is asking you who you are. So I asked myself, who am I? Who am I in the face of all the things that we're dealing with these days. Who am I in the face of anti-Black racism? Who am I in the face of migrants drowning in the Mediterranean? Who am I in the face of this war that has just been declared today in Ukraine? Who am I in the face of the planet and its destruction? And I ask you those questions as well. So they're important personal questions that, like, I think go beyond the biological. And I think that's where we need to go. So my question is to you, is to how to make your personal also political, and to answer those questions, those relative questions about who you are in the face of all the things that we're dealing with. And that's it. I think I've finished just in time.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tessa, for your talk and for sharing your experiences, the entire presentation, and even like the portion in the beginning. It was all so insightful. And it was also really interesting to hear how exactly the book developed. So now we'll be switching over to a Q&A with our audience. And before we get started, I just want to reintroduce myself. My name is The Snore, and I'm one of the members of the NFF Youth Advisory Council. So I believe we had a question in our Q&A box. Someone was asking if you could explain your 6 o'clock example a bit more, because they were interested and they wanted to fully understand it.
Yeah. So, okay. So 6 o'clock isn't real, right? It's something that we have learned to accept because we decided that the movement of the sun, the movement of the earth around the sun changed our understanding of what time of day it was, and we wanted to order that and agree on those things. So those agreements are the construct. So time is a construct, it doesn't actually exist. And so the way that I think about race is that race is a construct. It doesn't actually exist. It's something that we agree on through over history, that we agree and don't agree on. And one of the things about the book is that, you know, no one can actually tell me what race I am. I can't actually tell you what race I am because I've got so many mixes. So that the construct of race is something that's not real. And yet, just like not getting to your class at 6 o'clock or at 10 o'clock in the morning has consequences, and that, you know, you might miss it, you might, you know, something might happen, you'll miss your plane, you'll miss your train, you will miss your class. That has real consequences. So race, even though it doesn't exist, has real consequences in the world. Does that make sense? Does that answer the question? I hope.
For me, it definitely does. I
It was
completely.
Daniel that asked the question, yeah? Yes, great. Thank you, Daniel. Great.
Awesome. I think that's a great start to our Q&A session. I kind of wanted to steer away a little bit away from the book, and then we'll get back into it. But I wanted to ask you, when did you first start writing? You mentioned that you started writing the book from that moment that you initially spoke about, but, you know, when did you first put your, you know, pen to paper?
Yeah, I think I was quite young. I think I was writing poems, like terrible poems, really, really bad poems. But when I was probably around 10, I would say, and, you know, I think writing is something that you do, that I did as a way of understanding. So I was trying to figure out my place in the world, and to do that, I took to pen to paper. People have different ways of doing it. They do it through music or through dance, or, you know, it's that way of kind of just becoming an artist is about going in to understand what it is that makes you tick, or makes the world tick as well.
No, that's a lovely answer. I think like some form of like expression is so important for all of us, even if we don't, like, you know, end up going into like, or turning it into a career, just having that, like, that makes
Yeah.
continuing the same line of questioning, what importance did reading have in your life, you know, when you were younger and just growing up?
Yeah, really, really important. You know, I read that quote from James Baldwin. You know, you think that your pain and your heartache is the only yours, but then you read, and all of a sudden you belong to a whole world that you didn't know you belonged to. And so reading is important. And there's a story in the book about when I was in grade 1. and I had to do a presentation about a book. Like I had to present a book and do a presentation in front of the class. And I had this book. I was all ready to talk about this book. And the book was, the second word was ducklings. And the first word was ISLAND. And in my head, I had one pronunciation of that. And then the teacher said, oh, so your book is Island Ducklings. And I was pronouncing it Island Ducklings. And I felt so stupid. And so from that moment, I thought, oh my goodness, I really need to get this right. And so I became, very attuned to reading and to all of the things around language. It made me very sensitive. So I love music and I have a good ear for music. And so I kind of translate a lot of my musical sort of interest into also language.
That is so cool. I personally don't have an ear for music, so I don't know. I'd love to hear more about that later on if we have time. Sorry, moving into the writing process. If you don't mind sharing, what was the easiest part of writing this book? And on the flip side, what was the hardest part?
Okay, the easiest part. Well, because I'm a novelist, primarily have been a novelist, I think the easiest, the sort of most fun part was the bits that I had to, that there wasn't any data for, that I had to kind of make up, like that first bit that I read to you. The only part of that I know is fact is my grandmother, my Chinese grandmother. The other ancestors I had to imagine. And so that was fun. And I had imagined them based on family stories and based on history in what I could find out about it. But I didn't have to be factual because I couldn't be factual. And so that was a lot of fun. And I think I also liked talking about my family and the memories I have of being a young person in Toronto and traveling out west with my family in the car. And, so lots of the personal stuff I really like. I think it was, in a way, it was hard because I was worried that I was, my sister and brother were going to be pissed off at me for telling stories, but I made sure that I let them know about it and they read it before it came out. So that was fine. So I liked remembering and with them sharing those things. And the hardest part, I think, was kind of linking. There's lots of research that went into the book. I won a grant from the British Library to research in their Eccles collection, and I could have spent another year there because there's just so much. I spent about 8 months there, but it was there's so much. So trying to decide how to sift through all of that material that, on slavery, on indenture, on the history of race science and all of that stuff, trying to sift through that and make an argument or a narrative that, feels accessible rather than just about research was hard.
Well, you did a great job doing both aspects. Continuing on, you mentioned your family, and we actually had a question from someone asking, how did you learn a bit more about your heritage? They're from Latin America, and because they're so diverse and there's like a mix of different people,
Yeah.
They're not exactly sure what their racial or cultural background is. So they'd like to hear how you did it.
Yeah, well, lots of this, how I know about it are from stories from my parents. So and my cousin and cousins, I have a very large extended family, and I have a family that with older cousins who I left Guyana when I was 3, so I don't actually have memories of living there, and they do. And when I went back, I learned a lot. So a lot of it is from family stories from my cousins, but also from my grandmother and from my parents. And so, I knew that there were these elements of ethnicity in the background. I knew all of those parts of me. I just didn't know the specific people who they belong to. So I didn't have that specific, like, I don't know how to trace my Indian ancestor, for example, because she came on a boat she probably didn't have her name. So who was she? So it's a lot of kind of storytelling in some ways, and imagining and looking at other people who would have come at the same time to kind of put together a picture of who they are.
I can't imagine like just the process of like just going through, you know, sifting through your anecdotes, but also trying to find like, you know, the facts to back it up and to determine like who exactly were they? Because I feel like when you look at your ancestors, like looking at them, you know that there's like a part of them in you. So
Yeah,
just learning about them, it does something. It makes you feel like
yeah.
yourself.
It makes you feel like you belong. You come from a whole line. It was something that Elder Myrna was saying, you know, about all the people who come before us and who allow our being. I think it was a very powerful way of sort of sitting spiritually with our own being. And I really appreciated that, because I think that's how I feel, and that's how I felt in researching this book. I felt very grateful to my ancestors.
No, I completely agree. Kind of, you know, talking about our backgrounds, talking about our identities, we have a question asking about how do you find that there is a pressure to choose one identity or one side of your background?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's interesting. One of the things that I make a kind of comment in the book that is kind of, it's not glib, but it's not totally serious either. So I say, when people ask me what race I am, I say writer, partly because it's that for me expresses the complexity of the my racial background, but it also, you know, I have very strong political feelings about being politically Black. I have an affinity with Blackness that is about, and my anti-Black racism is a huge part of my politics. So it depends on you know, sort of the context of where I'm dealing, but you know, I identify as a Black mixed race woman.
No, I completely agree. Just, you know, parts like what you said about making it like your personal political, I completely agree. You know, your identity influences a lot of who you are and like the issues that you stand for. And yeah, I completely agree where you're coming from. Kind of, again, along the same line of questioning, to you, what does the word belonging mean?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, recently I've been thinking, so when I grew up, I felt I didn't belong anywhere, and that was a problem. And I suffered for that. And I think I kind of felt outside and alienated from, in a cultural way and in a racialized way. And then I decided that I belonged everywhere because of those things. And so that was a strength. So that lack of definitive belonging in one place was actually a strength. And so belonging became bigger. And then recently I've written a book that deals with sort of 4 people who don't belong at all in a work of fiction. And I'm actually kind of, I use this kind of, not glibly either, but unbelonging as a kind of great thing to have. And that when I say unbelonging, what I mean by that is that when you belong, or when you say you belong to a country, an ethnicity, a football team, you know, a thing, an entity, they all come with ideology. You know, they all come with a set of expectations. And sometimes not belonging to one thing allows you to move more fluidly through a lot of things that may be more international in a way, maybe more, you know, I belong to a group of people. I feel like I belong to a group of people who resist oppression, who resist any kind of supremacy, who believe in making the world a more equal place. So my belonging is different to a kind of biological or national thinking.
I really like that way of thinking. I completely agree. I feel like sometimes like the more traditional view of belonging can just be another form of like categorization, like
Yeah,
fitting yourself into a box. But I really like what you said about belonging to just a group of people who believe in, you know, these ideals. Just
yeah.
doesn't have to be
And
so.
I think you can make it too. You know, belonging is something. One of the lines from my very first novel, which dealt with this issue as well, is belonging is something you can give to yourself. It doesn't have to be bestowed upon you. You know, you can choose it. You can go. I belong to. In a way, I will always belong with my family, but you know, because I from that, but also because I care about them. But you know, I also have many families of people that I belong to as well for my cultural and intellectual thinking.
No, that quote's really beautiful. And just, you know, speaking of your novels or speaking of the other like books you've written, we have one question asking what was your favorite novel that you wrote and why?
Okay. My favorite novel is always the next one I'm going to write, because I always feel like I'm still learning to be the best writer I can be. And so I think that, so then I'd have to say my most recent one, which is called The Snow Line. And it's my favorite because there's a character who is a kind of unlikely character that I might write about, who is an 86-year-old white man who's been all over the world and has had an advantage and privilege, but he's in India, and he has his wife's ashes in his suitcase with him in order to spread them somewhere. And what happened with that character is that even though he was kind of a irritating white man who's older man who hasn't seen his responsibilities in the world, he meets a very young mixed race woman, and they become friends, but he has to deal with who he is. I had to deal with who he is. I had to have compassion for him. I had to understand him deeply, and I ended up really loving him, because I think a character that the author doesn't love is a bad character, is a failed character. So I think I loved writing him.
That's honestly, that's a very interesting take. I would figure that like, you know, you would resonate most with characters that are like you, but I completely agree. Like I understand where you're coming from. It's very
It
interesting.
was an exercise in empathy to love someone who might not be someone you would necessarily be on a trip in India with.
I feel like if it was like I feel like that probably like really helped you grow, you know, like and
Yeah.
like how do I, you know, create a character that I don't necessarily relate with, that I don't necessarily initially like, but that's really interesting to hear. Um, going back to just the feeling of belonging, how
Yeah.
can we make our own belonging? Because this person asks, they feel a lot of pressure to fit into society, and it can be hard to kind of, you know, create that own sense for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that that's a lifelong thing to make your own belonging, but I think because I also think that that's a spiritual quest, you know, to belong to yourself on the planet as you are, the perfect person you are, not formed by any other outside thinking. That's a constant thing. But also in terms of, you know, belonging with others, I think a lot of us feel like we don't belong. You know, when I talk about belonging, people say that it has to do with ethnicity or racial categories. And with this book, I got so many letters from people who you might think that they would belong, but they don't. And so they are questioning this idea that belonging comes in those ways of you know, through you know, your national or racial identity. And so I think it's about all of us looking to talking about those things, you know, and talking about real belonging and what that means. And I think real belonging is to each other's hearts, to each other's politics, to each other's sense of land and sense of space and respect for you know, sort of each other. And I think there are lots of us who would rather belong in those spaces than in any kind of other um, nationalistic spaces.
Yeah, and any other like, typical sense of the word belonging.
Yeah, yeah.
That was really beautifully said. We do have a few questions specifically about the book. I don't know if you want to open up the Q&A section.
Okay, okay.
There is one about in the area knows. There's a line that says,
Oh yeah.
yeah, if you'd like to just answer that.
So this is my way of writing the Guyanese accent that is the line that we gonna brown y'all up. And so what that person meant was that there was a Black man standing, this is with my parents in 1956, standing on Speaker's Corner here in London and saying, because we're here, and you see all you white people out there, and I'm a Black person, I'm here, and you brought me here because I'm a part of colonial history. Well, we're going to have babies with all of you, and we're going to brown everybody up. So he was being quite aggressive, but it's also, what he's saying is that we are going to affect you. We're going to infiltrate your special sort of separate Englishness, and we're going to brown you all up.
Thank you. Thank you for the clarification. I kind of like that. I like that message. Another question, I believe by the same person, was there was a word that you put along your book, "Oh, the world," that was very frequent. So they were wondering what exactly you meant by that.
Yeah. So it's what my mother says a lot. She'll talk to me and she'll feel so overwhelmed by the politics. Like right now, if I were talking to her today, and she, because we've all heard about Russia's invasion of Ukraine today, she would go, "Oh, the world, oh, the world," and it's her kind of exasperation of, oh my goodness, oh my goodness, what have we come to? What is going on? It's overwhelming. Oh, the world. So it's to be read in that kind of way. Oh, the world. I hope that answers your question, Neela.
I feel like a lot of people are saying that today, especially.
Yeah.
Given like current circumstances. We have a few questions actually about just gaining more resources to learn about the concepts that you discussed in your presentation.
I can give those to Anushka, and they're also at the back of the book. There are some lots of references in terms of those books. So we can possibly get Anushka to share some of those with the group.
Okay, awesome. Yes, or just looking at the book itself, revisiting it again.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. We do have another question. It kind of not necessarily like related to the book, but coming from you directly, if you have any message for racialized youths whose natural features and bodies are constantly devalued and rejected by mainstream society, mainstream culture.
Yeah, I mean, it's a horrible, constantly aggressive thing to happen as just a person trying to live their life. And I think in terms of, do I have any suggestions of how? I think solidarity with those others who feel the same. Reading, there's so much in terms of books and blog sites of anti-Black racist ways of coping, and the groups and books, and I think I can probably give Anushka some of those sites as well. I think it's about reading. I think it's about reading and understanding the solidarity that comes with reading. I hope that's not a great answer, but it's a really hard question. It's a really hard thing to do.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. But I also do agree that it's pieces of media like novels can provide that sense of, solidarity. When you see yourself reflected in the works that you consume, it's like, it's a great feeling. So I definitely agree with your answer. Similarly, someone writes, someone who's mixed, I've always had a tension with the word white passing. I've been told everything under the sun that I'm both Asian looking or white. I'd love to know if there's any alternative language that you would use to describe the strange feeling of being seen as different identities in different contexts or situations.
Yeah, I think that it's about getting away from big categories, about, white passing or almost Asian or Asian looking or non-white or all of those. Those are huge categories that are about othering people, right? And so I'd say it's about being specific. I am a woman, a Canadian person who lived in Canada, born in Guyana, of mixed race heritage. So I think about being specific about who you are and what you're from is a first step. And then to understanding that all of those categories are categories that can make people feel that they have power over you. So in other words, the closeness to whiteness tends to be what I call living in the plantation house rather than working in the field. If you think of this, a hierarchy as the plantation and as the whiteness being in the house, then that kind of proximity to whiteness means you're privileged. And I think it's about breaking that down, recognizing it first and breaking it down and not participating in that hierarchy. Not allowing that kind of conversation to take place.
Yeah, and like that in itself can be difficult to do because it's so prevalent and so widespread. But no, I completely agree. I've definitely noticed that language as well, or just, seeing that people thinking to themselves, like, oh, if I look white passing, then, that's a good thing. That
yeah, exactly.
No.
It's about knowing that it's not necessarily good. That it's about power, and it's about someone appropriating you into their world of power in order to perpetuate inequality, and I think it's about that who are you person in the face of that is what I was talking about at the end of the talk.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like just whiteness as a concept, like all these, like even race, like as a construct, it just serves to like divide us, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So while we're arguing about, what are you and your identity politics and, that division that we all experience, the fascists are walking in, and so we have to stand together against that rather than perpetually be divided that way.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. Similarly, so on the topic of, white passing or like, oh, looking like this or that, someone writes, language is always evolving, especially regarding diversity. So do you find that even as a writer, you have to keep up to date? And how do you go about educating yourself?
Absolutely. Again, reading. And language is always evolving. And also, I think respecting what other people call themselves. I respect whoever you say you are and what you want, how you want to be identified, and the language you want me to use. I do that. And I'm learning, and I teach at a university, and I'm constantly learning from my students about language, and we're all in it together trying to do because language is power, and language is powerful, and language hurts, and language can be violent, and it can also be healing. And I think how you use language is absolutely primary in how we get along.
No, I mean, like, I feel like that's what we're all gaining, like through this discussion. Like language is power. The words that you are meaningful, your intent behind them, the message, like what's being perceived, it's very important. There's a lot to consider. Speaking like on the topic of learning, do you find that you've learned more about yourself from your readers and their feedback on the works that you've created?
Absolutely. I have been blessed by readers telling me how much they were affected, and I didn't necessarily see some of those readers as my primary audience, and then I realized that they were, and I've learned a lot about, because when you're writing something, you actually it's such a kind of repository for your own understanding that you don't actually know what it does. So when it does something for someone, you learn about your own power with language. You learn about how the language you chose has an effect. And that's hugely important for me as a writer.
No, I can't imagine the feeling, you know, like you put like this work that was like so deeply personal to you out into the world, and just receiving that feedback, receiving that from people that you may not have expected it from. I think
Yeah,
that must have been, you know, so impactful in its own right.
it is.
So moving on, talking about Canada specifically, I guess you would say this is more of a political question. How do you implicate Canada as a former slave-holding democracy, a colonial project whose expansion was funded through stolen labor from the West Indies, Guyana, and beyond?
I implicate Canada hugely. You know, we have this myth in Canada that we didn't participate. We have this like, oh, you know, slavery happened in the States, and it's just not true, you know. And I think that's becoming much more kind of accepted. And I implicate Canada in many ways as a state, and certainly as a state that has you know, been responsible for the genocide of First Nations people. And I think that it began there, and that it's and that then it has a lot to answer to as a state, as a nation state. So absolutely.
No, definitely. We need to be asking those questions and like demanding some sort of response. We can't just, you know, blow past our like own history and like criticize everyone else. So I definitely agree. Another question. Hi, Tessa. Thanks for sharing with us today. Can you elaborate on the whiteness mindset and the way it operates or manifests within society, both locally and globally?
Yeah. So in my analysis of, you know, that plantation, and that whiteness is in the house, in the plantation house, running the economic and the whole social structure of a place. In other words, you could be, so it's a political, it's an economic, and it's a social, and it's a mindset, because you could be a person of color and perpetuate that social structure. You could perpetuate the othering that goes on at the bottom of that plantation when you're talking about those who didn't make it into the power structure that you were part of, that you might have moved through. And so that whiteness can even if you're a Black person, you could be an anti-Black person in a particular choice that you are making. It could be from an anti-Black racist kind of choice, and it's a kind of mentality. And I think we need to look at ourselves and look at the structures. And that's why I ask, who are you? Because if you're that person who has moved through the power structure of the plantation, and as a person of color, and you are perpetuating violence on the people who didn't, that's whiteness.
No, I definitely agree. And I would almost say that like at times in history, like those at the top, like they've perpetuated those divides. They want, you know, like they promote
Absolutely.
one group over another too. So, you know, that hate can kind of, you know, take on a life of its own. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
you really have to be mindful about like why, you know, the intent behind your actions and where that intent is coming from.
Exactly.
Another question about your book. So the attendee writes, in your book, in the area, what are you? It shows a part saying you're socially white, politically Black, and culturally both. And I also said a few lines down, he thought he was affirming me, but I felt steeped in shame. Why did you feel shame?
Yeah, great. That's kind of the core of the book, because you know, I felt divided. I felt, okay, so I appear one way. I'm socially I socially have a lot of, you know, white friends. I've gone through that hierarchy and ended up with a certain amount of power as a professor at a university. So I was shamed because I felt that I was divided, but also that I belonged to the shame of the conqueror. I have, Scottish plantation owner family ancestry rather, and so there's the shame of the white settler, the shame of the white colonizer, as well as the shame of my African ancestors who sold each other, the shame of being part of a liberal system and buying into that liberal system that says that things are post-racial and that we're not living on the plantation. So there's lots of shame at the center of the book, but that shame is about also thinking about how to live differently. I no longer want to be part of the plantation. I want off the plantation. And so what does that mean? And it's a kind of shame that I ask everybody to think about. It's the who are you? Where do you sit with all of these questions? And so that was the moment that I started to unpack that sort of political blackness that is very important to the book.
Wow. No, that is a lot to unpack. And I think we don't have much time left, but just continuing on that, same vein of questioning, if there's one message that we as an audience can take away from this book, what should it be?
One message. Okay. Well, I think the message is that belonging is yours to uncover, but that also the way that you will do that is to answer the question, who are you, rather than what are you?
No, I definitely agree. I think that's like throughout the entire discussion that we've had today, I think that's been a reoccurring theme in, a lot of the questions and a lot of the answers. So that was beautiful. Thank you. So your conversation about identity and race and belongingness was so important to me personally, and I imagine to so many of our attendees. As we said, language is more than words, and it does have the potential to impact our lives in so many different ways. So again, we really thank you for taking the time to have this conversation with us. So now,
thank you. It was my pleasure to be here. Thanks to everybody who organized this wonderful event and for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
We really appreciate your presence. Your presence was a present. Now I would like to pass it over to Spencer, one of my fellow YAC members, for some closing remarks.
Hi, everyone. I'm Spencer, a member of the NFF Youth Advisory Council. Wow, I mean, what a book club this has been. Tessa, thank you so much again for making this amazing event a reality for all of us. We are so fortunate to have you speaking to us today. I personally feel so inspired by your words, both in Shame on Me and the fascinating stories and valuable lessons you shared with all of us at the book club today. I also want to thank you for being here at the book club, our 6th annual. So maybe when all of you first heard about our book club today, your curiosity was sparked, or a friend told you about it, or you were looking for a meaningful new read. Whatever it was that led you to register and brought you here, you took some of your afternoon to listen and take part in what we have created collectively by being all present for this digital gathering of all of our hearts and minds. And the active role we all played in that amazing Q&A and all of this made this event possible and as impactful as it was. So thank you for all of that and taking time out of your afternoon to be here and be part of this. And I'm really was so inspired by all of your questions, and I encourage you to keep thinking about them and exploring them, and through your artistic projects, through your creativity, as Tessa's done in her career and with Shame on Me, because this is something we can apply the lessons that Tessa has shown us through her moving words in our own lives, however they authentically apply. And art, as Tessa has shown, is a huge way that we can really get to this, however that looks for each of us. In addition, our communities are better for thinking about things like this, and for all of you being here, because whether it's your workplace, your team, your club, and any other relationship you are in, thinking about these about these topics, and fostering a mutual understanding and loving each other for the unique things that belong uniquely to each of us is really how we build our healthy communities and be part of that. And that's really such a beautiful thing that I think we've explored through the book club today. So if anyone experienced some discomfort and needs someone to talk to, reach out to the numbers on the screen, and there are some other resources being provided in the chat box. Now I would like to invite our Elder Myrna to provide a closing of the event. Thank you so much, Elder Myrna. Your words are always so enlightening and insightful.
Well, this has been an amazing event. I'm really grateful that I was here to witness what was happening, not only in the words, but in the depth of your emotion, in your bodies and your hearts and your minds and your spirits. This was very touching. And I'd like you to take a few moments now so that we can close this event. Not forget about it, but close it so that we can process all of those things, those questions that were raised here. And so it is really important to understand our place in this creation. It is so very important. In my way of understanding, it takes me back to the creation story, to the creation of this place, of this earth, of this system before time. Because there's one spirit that watched over all of us, and set things in motion. And there's all of those things that we all need to understand and learn about. Because there are 4 colors of man. There are those things, those instructions that each color of man were given when we were placed here on this creation. So all of those things are so important, and to understand and know where you fit in this creation. You are the vessel of the Spirit. And being that vessel of the Spirit, it is to pick up our responsibility for this creation. Pick up the responsibility for all of those things we see around us. So with those words, I'd like to close this session and ask you just to go inside yourself. And with these words, I'll offer these closing words. Abba Joma Shomas, Ishkote Makasin Klandis and Kaz Mondodem, Bekajonan Dunjaba, Budawadamio Dawa Nishnami Klanda, this week, David. Jimmy Gwetch Kashem Nado for this most beautiful day, for this most wonderful life. Jimmy Gwetch for all of those things that opened up our hearts, our minds, and our spirits, and gave us a voice of understanding, a voice of connection, a voice of knowing that we are here to do your work in whatever way you need us to do that work. Because it's going to take all of us to provide that place for those ones coming behind us, for those ones that are not yet born, so that they will have a place that they could call their home here on this creation. Being the youngest of creation, the human beings, they are the youngest. We have a lot to learn, and we have a lot to offer. So I say Chimigwech Geshem Nado for pulling us all together here this afternoon, for opening up our hearts, our minds, and our spirits, and having a voice echoing within inside of us, so that we know where we come from. We know where we're going. We are here to work together as one heart, one body, one mind, one spirit, and one voice. We are here to learn how to take care of this creation, so that all of us who are here and present will have good thoughts, kind words, being respectful, and picking up our responsibilities for helping each other in all of this creation, I say Chimigwech to you, Gajem Nado, for this most wonderful life. I am very grateful and appreciate all that has been said here today. And I can hear it echoing across the world to find that place of peace, that place of respect, that place of honor, that place of humility. I say Chimigwech to you for taking the time with us this afternoon. Chimigwech to all. Nikanagana, all my relations, aho, miigwech, wamampi minwa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elder Myrna. We really appreciate your presence and your words today, and it means so much to, I think, everyone on the call, speaking for everyone here. As we are moving towards the end of the event now, if you liked the event and enjoyed and would want to engage in more conversations about intersectionality and identity, please join us for our first ever youth conference happening on March 24th, just about a month from now. If you want to know more about the youth conference, please follow the link provided in the chat box. Also, we would love to hear from you about this event. Your feedback is so important to us as we continue on this path of having such important conversations. By filling out the evaluation link, you will enter in the contest to win a $25 gift card for any place of your choice. The evaluation link is in the box in the chat. So thank you so much, everyone. That brings us to the end of our 6th annual book club today. We are so happy you joined us today, and we wish you all the best for the rest of your day. So thank you again, and feel free to exit the call at your convenience.